Hi there, it's Shannon, the integrative counselor. Today I'm coming on here to give some realistic information as to what healing from trauma actually requires. And it requires many things that are not being accurately communicated through social media. It's so wonderful that the world is waking up to trauma. However, it's a mess. And there's a lot of misinformation, and I just want to give realistic, nuanced information, week after week, day after day, as to what in the world do you really do when recovering from trauma. And so I often use the word heal, and I don't mean when I say heal, I mean wholeness. They're synonymous to me, and wholeness is the acceptance of all, and of course, the acceptance of all means all parts are welcome and included. And of course, getting to the acceptance stage with trauma recovery and processing and integration includes the grief and the anger stages. And I use somatic, and parts work processes for both of these because oftentimes trauma recovery is done from just a purely cognitive basis, and that's not complete enough, and it's definitely not complete enough for those of us that experience chronic trauma, complex trauma, childhood trauma, and systems trauma. Unfortunately, for those of us that have experienced those things, which can include things like medical trauma, religious trauma, social political trauma, those folks that are intergenerational trauma, refugees, immigrants, domestic violence, those sorts of things. Um, the process is actually lean into it because it's lifelong. And so many folks really hate this information. I hated it too. I didn't want it to be true. I trusted early on in my process. I trusted those influencers too. I was like, if you just do the one thing, then your life is going to be whatever. Well, there are some low hanging fruit, and of course, some of those influencers are right as to like low hanging fruit that you can get a large chunk of the recovery process done and a lot of things completed. However, but if you're looking at, if you experience decades of trauma, or if you're currently experiencing trauma because of things like racism, or you have a disability, or you're neurodivergent, and or you're any sort of marginalized identity, especially in America where it's so many things that are so many people are attacked just for existing, especially now. There is going to be repetitive, re-traumatization of individuals that's going to happen, as is stress and just the complexity of reality. And so, nervous system and somatic based practices are essential if you have experienced trauma, period. And then they're doubly essential if you've experienced complex systems trauma, things like racism, medical trauma, and intergenerational trauma. And then we have to lean into the fact that stress on top of a traumatized and or neurodivergent nervous system is going to exacerbate things. And then some people do really great with stress, with trauma histories, like they thrive, right? And that just tells you, this person has complex trauma a lot of the times. Um, if someone can, if they're in the zone when things get hard, like that's like a hot tip of like, oh, your nervous system has survived a lot of chaos, and that tells us a whole lot. And so, even in my own personal process, I've disclosed that I have a complex trauma history. Every single day when I get up, I act as if it's day one of my life, and dedicate to myself to the process of getting curious and being compassionate and using all of my tools all day long if necessary. And of course, there are days where those of us, and days and months and weeks where where things are okay, especially if we get really kind of late stage in the trauma recovery process, and then something can happen, and it deeply not only triggers us but just throws us off, and we're completely overwhelmed. And if you are neurodivergent, things like sensory things. I've got a light on right here, right now, just to show you that I'm not a ghost sitting in a room because it's very low light in here. But that can be stimulating for someone. So can just questions, even in like a therapy session. Everything is stimulation, so of course. So that can be a really hard piece for folks to really embody. It's like this is lifelong. Now it doesn't have to mean that you are going and receiving services and therapy lifelong, and maybe it does. But that doesn't mean that you have to be hyper vigilant about your trauma recovery, because the process goes in and out, and we have to rest, and we have to play, and there's all of these different stages, and all of these different practices, because trauma recovery to me is more of a practice than anything. And oftentimes, I'm lowering the expectations, because if we have expectations to heal, our nervous system can start to go into a freeze. And that's why I find sometimes goals to be profoundly not useful. We can hold intention for goals, but I often will use things like strengths based or motivational interviewing, or just things like body-based practices to see what's here now. Because what is happening is there's so much being bypassed of, like, your nervous system's in such a state as it is right now, and then you're trying to get to a different state, but you're not in that state because you're in this state. And so there becomes this kind of freeze process that's happening, and people get locked into the freeze process, and this freeze gets diagnosed as all of these things, physical and mental. And it feels like I have to, but I can, or you're tired and wired, and you're exhausted, anxious, and depressed. A lot of thoughts, but a lot of procrastination, decision fatigue, all of that is happening, and then all of these mental health conditions and all these physical health conditions are being diagnosed. And so we have to lower the stimulation, and we have to use a lot of different nervous system tools. I use a ton of different nervous system mapping, even to understand, the different cycles that people that get into, or the nervous system gets into, and from a neuroscience based perspective, teaching people what this is, what happens in this and this and this and this, because with healing comes the awareness into the patterns. And when I talk about healing, I'm talking about shifting patterns. And so we can only shift patterns within the capacity that the nervous system can shift. It's like doing like reps in the gym, but inside your nervous system. And your nervous system capacity can shift. And this is not very much known out there in the World Wide Web, but there are. But then what gets shown on the World Wide Web is like, go for cold plunges, and that's going to regulate you. No, that could also, that could also dysregulate you. So what works for one person can dysregulate another person. Um, I am very much trained in trauma and complex trauma, and I can assure you that there is no one thing universally that, like, nature is helpful for. It's helpful for a lot of people, but it is sometimes for some people it's just not. Music is the same way. Movement, it just depends. And so that's why looking at information that's available can be helpful to some extent, but then getting one-on-one care is super important. The other thing that I see is there's a lot of neurodivergent individuals. I am neurodivergent, and so there is a neurotypical standard way to heal sometimes. That's what's kind of being talked about. There's not. But you have to understand that if you have autism, ADHD, both and at the same time, your nervous system is picking up on truly more sensory information. And so we have to have nervous system tools. We just have to. We have to have somatic nervous system tools, period, to engage with life, and even just at the sensory perception level. And so please understand that. So this is just dedicating yourself to, and it may be 100 times a day, is rededicating yourself over and over to, I'm a survivor, and I'm using my tools, and I'm getting curious, and I'm going to be compassionate, and I'm going to use my tools as many times possible, and putting yourself first. And putting yourself first as far as like filling your cup up and starting your day and ending your day with practices, and then checking in with yourself. I usually start people on 3 check-ins a day, starting, ending, the middle of the day, and then we build from there. Because what we are doing is we're building the capacity for moment to moment awareness, and therefore pattern shifting and disrupting. Meaning disrupting from trauma patterns into healing patterns. And the more that you do the work, the more that it comes naturally. I'm an advanced somatic experiencing practitioner. I don't know if it's my 3rd or 4th year practicing somatic experiencing. And as I've been practicing, it is now moment to moment awareness. And it's, instead of having like a bad, what I used to have like bad days, weeks, months, probably years and decades, it's now, I'm reducing not only the level and the intensity, but the length of duration. It's like, oh, that was a hard 5 minutes, right? The bad hour. And so I'm doing a lot of practice with folks to like really validate this and to show that. And so when we talk about healing, I put this in quotation marks because when we talk about trauma healing, we're talking about processing trauma through the body, mind, spirit, energy, and integrating that into your greater picture of your authentic self. And that is a process that you get in working with people that understand that and have a lot of different modalities to help you navigate through that. And so when we're processing that, then things, we're looking for hallmarks of healing, and hallmarks of healing of the symptoms are lessening in duration, lessening in intensity, and then in frequency. And then you're having more health, you're having more ease, you're having more curiosity, you're having more compassion, you're having more clarity, you're having more play, you're having more presence, you're having more purpose, you are more of your authentic self, you understand yourself, you're not looking to people please, you're looking to take care of yourself and therefore others. You're connected to yourself, others, in spirit. And we're looking for degrees of this because our nervous system cannot shift from, a lot of times people, I just say they blow out their nervous system by trying to heal, like, I'm going to go on an intense healing, experience this weekend. And your nervous system has to be prepared for that. So I do a lot of not only nervous system practices, but visualization practices with individuals so that we can start to embody the new neural templates that are going to be overlaid on the trauma brain physiology. We're gonna install some healing codes into the brain and therefore the body, or the body and therefore the brain. Actually, there's more capacity. It's like going from brain to body is 80 or 20% brain to body capacity, as far as like change shift. But if you go from body to brain, it's 80%. So that's why I usually do that, and that allows for the thinking to happen, and that to be part of the process. But thinking are usually traumatized parts that are thinking. Definitely some managers. So we want to go body first, and this is a bottom up. So I'm a bottom up practitioner, and I'm teaching top down strategies. So we're completing that whole 100% of opportunity for you to heal. And with that, we've got to make sure that we have the capacity for the new healing patterns to be a part of your reality. And this is why goals. Sometimes people fall short and sabotage your goals because they don't have the capacity, the nervous system capacity to even, because it's all stimulation. So a trigger, obviously that's stimulating to the nervous system, but so is receiving something good. And trauma survivors know this better than anyone. Something good happens, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. We're like, okay, when is the sky going to fall? Or when is everything going to fall apart? And that can be at certain degrees of that, certainly. Because, or we may be there's all these different nervous system patterns, or someone can be super pleasure seeking and avoiding at the same time. So what's true for one trauma survivor, the complete opposite, and then both and are also true. And so I love when people are like, this is a trauma. So I'm like, that's a trauma response for one certain type of person, but there's so many others. And so we've got to train our nervous system, because late stage healing includes play, mindfulness, presence, going after your goals, aligning with your purpose, being more and more connected, being more and more present. And we have to train our nervous system to actually be able to hold those. I don't even want. It's hard to explain this. To hold the somatic. Procedural patterns and frequencies, to hold the energies, to hold that level of information, because it's all stimulation. Even goodness is stimulation, and your nervous system doesn't know the difference. And if we have had a lot of negative experiences, or a lot of like interpersonal trauma where people are misperceiving us or harming us just for because we exist. For neurodivergent people, it's like, yes, I just told the truth, and now I'm not allowed to talk to you. So we have to be able to train for that, train inside for that, so that we don't, so our nervous system doesn't, there's can often be this rubber band effect when someone tries to go a little bit too far out. Again, this is a window of tolerance thing, so not doing enough on one end of the spectrum of healing, but then a lot of times people get hyper vigilant in their healing and they try to do too much. And unfortunately, especially in America, the culture that is very dysfunctional reinforces this, and they will offer, well, let's heal in a week in a healing intensive. You have to prepare for a healing intensive, okay? Nobody goes and just climbs a mountain or runs a marathon. You have to train your nervous system to be able to do those things without re-traumatizing yourself again, or experiencing exacerbation of your physical and mental health symptoms. And this also goes for goals, because what comes up in the goals is a bunch of self-sabotage, inferiority complex, a lot of freeze, a lot of procrastination. All of this is trauma physiology when we're trying to go for goals and things like that. And so we do have to train the nervous system, and somatics and visualization and nervous system practices are some of the most underutilized tools, as is just the mindset around it, around what healing really involves. And then it is just it's just dropping into, like, just like you would drop into, like, you are a mother for the rest of your life. You are a human for the rest of life. You are someone with a trauma history for the rest of your life, and you are dedicating every single moment of, like, this is day one. This is what I say to myself. You can say something different to yourself. And starting, and it's always, it's like at the front and center, I'm going to use my skills, my goals, my compassion, my tools. I'm going to get really curious. I'm going to notice patterns, and I'm going to dedicate myself to seeing how many patterns that I can shift. I'm also going to take breaks. I'm also going to have fun and play and all of this, but we have to have we have to have those sorts of mindsets. And oftentimes this comes towards the middle of the trauma healing process, when people are like, oh my gosh, this is going to take a minute, right? And because there's a lot of quick wins and low hanging fruits sometimes at the very beginning, but when we get more into the nuances, especially for those of us with the intergenerational trauma, religious trauma, childhood trauma, complex trauma, we're dealing with several generations before us, and these somatic implicit memories and emotional flashbacks that are coming out in these energies. If you start getting into how I practice internal family system, sometimes the energies of within your system are not even yours. They're burdens of your ancestors. They're burdens of your culture. They're burdens of the collective. And sometimes they're other energies that are lodged within your system. And so the more that you get into, there's just layer and layer. It's like an onion, right? Like there's an onion and layer. And we're also, from a spiritual perspective, we're also giving all these opportunities. Yes, I said opportunities because I work through an empowering trauma healing modality recovery process. We're kind of going up the spiral as to seeing, like, okay, last time something like this would have just took me out of commission for several weeks, and now it's like a couple hours. And, like, then we can celebrate yourself, because you have to celebrate yourself along the journey. You have to validate yourself. You've got to commit to yourself, to not abandon yourself. And that's what I'm talking about every morning. You're committing to not abandoning yourself. You can't abandon yourself. And especially for those of us that experienced a lot of neglect, of course, we're going to have our default state is going to be self-abandonment. So we've got to recommit ourselves to not abandoning ourselves, not bypassing, and spiritually or emotionally or otherwise, the reality of how much, well, some people have worse. Yes, maybe. And also, it's pretty bad for you too, boo. So we've got to be focusing on ourselves, because everyone deserves healing. And the only thing within your control is your own. And so we've got to have a lot of these different mindsets as far as trauma recovery. And you can go in and out of the process of working with practitioners, in and out of the process of reading books, in and out of the process of being in and out of the process, but understanding that's a process and it's lifelong, because not only are we humans first with trauma histories, but we're humans first, which means that life is always coming at us, and there's different developmental tasks and things that happen if with each decade, and with different transitions that are also going to be impacting us as well, that are also going to confront the trauma history and just our own physical body and stress. Stress is part of life. But what's not part of life is having chronic stress and chronic trauma. And in America, this is just so prevalent because of the generations of intergenerational trauma and systems trauma. And there's so many people that are highly traumatized and just unaware of that's what is going on. And so hopefully this information kind of helps you get a little bit more realistic view. And it's not all doom and gloom, because trauma processing comes with recovering the wisdom of your ancestors. Yes, some of them had some wisdom. Yes, even you. Though my ancestors don't have it. Yes, they do. And recovering your own innate wisdom, your own innate energetic state, your own innate wholeness, in which we all are. In a lot of the systems of the world I have tricked and deceived and traumatized into believing that we're not whole or capable or aspects of the divine, and all of that is not true. And part of it is recovering that core essence of yourself, which never leaves. And that's the grounding thread in that. That's the thread that runs through the whole experience. I call this I call this unfuckwithable, because this thread is not only the dedication toward to healing in this lifetime, but also this unshakable piece that becomes part of your process no matter what. That's in the background, because at some point in the process, when there's enough compassion and curiosity in your system for enough consistent amount of time, you're not going to abandon yourself, because you're committed not to abandon yourself. You're going to get curious. You're going to lean into everything. You're going to do your shadow work. All of these things, and you're just going to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper in the process. And it always ends up being very spiritual. There's no way about it. There just isn't. And don't get it twisted on that word scaring you, because it's been very that word has been their spiritual abuse is rampant in society, and you're allowed to define that for yourself, because that definition could be presence, could be connected to oneself, others, the world around you, and that there's nothing more spiritual than that. So hopefully this has helped to kind of demystify what the process and the mindset and some of the tools that are around trauma healing, and I hope to give more realistic information than what is out there on the World Wide Web. Thanks for watching, and share if you'd like. Bye-bye.